This morning's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriya-yoga. This week's reading, The Law of Karma, Bondage or Soul Release. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The Epistle of St. Paul to the Galatians contains this oft-quoted statement. Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda tells a story from the life of the Benares saint Trilanga Swami. A skeptic once determined to expose Trilanga as a charlatan. A large bucket of calcium lime mixture used in whitewashing walls was placed before the Swami. Master, the materialist said in mock reverence, I have brought you some clabbered milk. Please drink it. Trilanga unhesitatingly drained to the last drop the container full of burning lime. In a few minutes, the evildoer fell to the ground in agony. Help, Swami, help, he cried. I am on fire. Forgive my wicked test. The great yogi broke his habitual silence. Scoffer, he said, did you not realize when you offered me poison that my life is one with your own? Except for my knowledge that God is present in my stomach, as in every atom of creation, the lime would have killed me. Now that you know the divine meaning of boomerang, never again play tricks on anyone. The well-purged sinner, healed by Trilanga's words, slunk feebly away. Yogananda goes on to say, the reversal of pain was not due to any volition of the master, but came about through unerring application of the law of justice, which upholds creation's farthest swinging orb. Men of God realization like Trilanga allow the divine law to operate instantaneously. They have banished forever all thwarting cross-currents of ego. Not by reason alone, but by self-realization are the ins and outs of destiny fully understood. Their web, though tied forever to the post of ego motivation, is too intricate to be perceived as a single thread. Only great masters can see it with clarity. It is visible to them in all its workings, not from within the tangle, but from above in superconsciousness. As Sri Krishna said in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he who beholds inaction in action and action in inaction is wise among men. He is one with the Spirit. He has attained the true goal of action, perfect freedom. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Welcome everyone to this morning's service, and welcome to those of you who are joining us online. For anyone who doesn't know us, my name is Swami Suryadas, and this is my wife Swami Chandi, and it's our joy to be here with you this morning, sharing in our Guru's teachings. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving day. We had a very lovely potluck banquet here at the temple, and here in the sanctuary we had a play, a P.G. Woodhouse play, and a couple of our players sang songs, and they got plastic fruits and vegetables thrown at them. And I'm hoping everyone's got that out of their system and we won't have any of that this morning. I recall the first time I ever attended an Ananda Sunday Service. It was over 32 years ago. And I remember being especially moved by the music, and in particular, the songs in the Festival of Light. The first time I experienced that sacred ceremony, I remember being brought to tears of joy. And then a few weeks later, I attended my first kirtan. And in those days, Dharmadas and Nirmala lived in Seattle, and they led the kirtan. And again, I was deeply moved by the music. This was a new experience for me. But there was one chant that had a very powerful effect on me. And that chant was, "Desire, my great enemy." And well into that chant, there is a line, it gets repeated several times, has a kind of haunting melody, and it is, "You won't have to fear anything anymore. You won't have to fear anything anymore." And I remember singing those words and being drawn into their power. In my life, prior to that date, I had experienced a great deal of fear. I grew up in an environment that didn't feel particularly safe, and I had to muster a lot of courage in my life. But in this song, in this chant, there was this promise that if we live these teachings, if we practice meditation, and especially kriya-yoga, which is referenced in this chant, if we serve selflessly, if we practice introspection and are willing to make changes as we see that they are needed, and especially if we offer ourselves up at the feet of our gurus so that we can be lifted up and transformed. This chant promised that if we do these things, we will be lifted into joy. We'll be lifted into a state of consciousness where no matter what is happening in the world, whatever is happening in our lives, we won't have to fear anything ever again. I thought, wow, this is for me. This is what I've been looking for all my life. And I've been practicing these teachings ever since then. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had just been elected president, and he famously said in his inaugural address, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And in those days, America was facing what we would call difficult karma. We were in the midst of the Great Depression, and there were tensions building in Europe that would ultimately pull us into the greatest war the world had ever known. And those words, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself," they were a great guiding principle for those difficult times, and they are a great guiding principle for dealing with all karma. For Yogananda said that outer circumstances are always neutral. He said that suffering is optional. We suffer not because of those outer circumstances, not because of our karma, but because of our reaction to those circumstances, because of our attitudes. Back in 1933, when Roosevelt uttered those words, Swami Yogananda, that's what he was called in those days, lived in Los Angeles, and from his base at Mount Washington, he was teaching Americans to spiritualize their lives. He was teaching them to experience direct contact with God through meditation, and especially through kriya-yoga. But he was also teaching them how to deal with the difficulties of those days, how to excel and to grow spiritually through the challenges that people faced. He was teaching them how to deal with karma in a positive way. And one of the first things he taught was that we must accept what is ours. Whatever comes to us, it is ours. We can't push it away. Sometimes we want to think, oh, it's not fair, it's not fair. But in fact, the law of karma works in such a way that if it comes to us, it is fair. This is the way it works. And of course, reincarnation is involved in this. So Yogananda taught that not only should we accept whatever comes, but that we should receive as a gift from God and Guru every circumstance that comes into our lives, to see it as a gift, no matter whether it seems to be a good thing, a pleasant thing, or an unpleasant thing. To see it as a gift that will guide us to greater understanding, to greater spiritual awareness. Yogananda used to tell a story of a saint, the saint who wouldn't be king. There were a group of saints who lived near a jungle in India, and they lived very simple lives, very austere lives, but also very beautiful lives. And they knew great spiritual happiness. They drank only of the crystal clear water that flowed in a stream nearby. They had no utensils, so they would use their hands to bring the water to their lips. They ate only of the abundant fruits that grew on trees around them. The weather was moderate, and they slept under an open sky with only the grasses of a meadow for their bed. And as I said, they knew great spiritual happiness. But one day, one of these saints had this thought. He thought, I know great spiritual happiness, but for one day, I'd like to experience kingly happiness. And with that thought in mind, he wandered down the path that led away from the jungle. And he walked on for some time, and he came upon a palatial mansion. And he thought, God has manifested this palace that I might experience kingly happiness for a day. And so he walked through the gates. No one was there to stop him, so he kept walking. And he found all these beautiful gardens all around with exotic plants he had never seen before, very fragrant plants. And so he enjoyed all of this. He walked through it. And then he entered the main door to the palace. And again, there was no one there to stop him. So he wandered about enjoying all the beautiful furnishings, enjoying the wonderful art that was all about the palace. And as he wandered about, he came upon the dining room. And he found that this beautiful feast had been spread on the table and was all ready for him to eat. But he thought, I'm going to take a bath, and then I'll enjoy this food. And so he went and he found the king's quarters. And he found that, sure enough, there was a hot bath all ready for him. And so he took a bath, he enjoyed it, he savored it. Then he dried himself off, and he found some elegant clothing in the closet, and he put it on, and he went down to dine on this veritable feast. And he was halfway through his meal when suddenly the king's servants entered the building. They had been expecting the king to arrive any time, and so they had prepared the bath and the food for him, but they had a little time before he would be back, and so they decided to wander out into the woods and gamble a little bit. And so they now returned, and they were aghast to see this stranger, this vagrant, wearing the king's clothes and eating his food. And they were about to eject him, but he said, I am a guest here of my king. He has invited me to enjoy kingly happiness for a day, to enjoy his palace, his food, and his bed. And they kind of looked at one another. They didn't know what to think about this, but they decided he was telling the truth. What they didn't know is that when he talked about his king, he wasn't speaking of the king of the region, he was speaking of the king of the universe. Anyway, they invited him to sit back down, and he finished his meal, and they brought him some wonderful cakes for dessert, and then they escorted him up to the king's quarters, where they put him in silk pajamas, turned down the bed for him. And so he had been sleeping for 2 or 3 hours, a beautiful deep sleep, when the king finally returned. And he had been delayed. He was due to be back when the servants came back. But he came back, and he was aghast to find that somebody had eaten his food and was sleeping in his bed. And he asked the servants, the guards, to remove him. And they roughly pulled him out of bed, and they began to beat him fairly severely. But with each blow, he just laughed gaily. He was filled with great joy. And the more they hit him, the more he laughed, and that made the guards even more angry, so they beat him even more severely. Finally, they tossed him outside the gates. He was unconscious and barely alive. And some of the other saints that he lived with came and found him, and took him back and nursed him back to health. But the king was disturbed by all this. He didn't understand how a man could be beaten and laugh with such obvious joy, with such gaiety. And so he asked the servants to find the man and bring him back to him. And so they searched high and low in the kingdom, and they couldn't find him anywhere. But one day, a few months later, some of the servants were passing down the path that led into the jungle, and they heard the man's gay laughter. And so they brought him back to the king. And the king asked them, how could you laugh like that while you're being beaten? How could you show so much joy? And at first, the saint wouldn't answer the king. He held his tongue. And the king knew that beating him wouldn't help. So he offered him riches to answer him. And of course, that didn't work, and the saint held his tongue. But finally, the saint realized that the king was sincere with a spiritual desire to understand. And so he told him, I wanted to experience kingly happiness for a day. And so God arranged for me to come to your palace and to enjoy a nice warm bath, to enjoy wonderful foods and furnishings, to enjoy your soft bed. But in my enjoyment of kingly happiness, I forgot about my true and lasting happiness in God. I forgot about my spiritual happiness. And God loved me so much that he arranged for me to be beaten so that I would remember him, so that I would remember what brings me true happiness in life. And I was just filled with joy that God cared about me so much. The king was deeply moved by all this, and his life was changed a little bit through it. And we can learn about karma by looking at the attitude of this saint. Whatever came to him, he saw it as a gift from God, as a gift meant to bring him to a state of greater and greater joy. It was an expression of God's love when something good happened to him and when something bad happened to him. For the spiritual aspirant, the distinctions between good karma and bad karma start to dissolve. What is good karma? What is bad karma? We can look at the life of a famous person, Helen Keller. Helen Keller was only a year and a half old when she came down with a disease, probably meningitis. And through that disease, she lost her ability to hear and her ability to see. And suddenly she was cut off to a great extent from all the world around her. And we could easily look at this and go, oh, that's such bad karma. But she was a very bright girl. Often when someone would enter her room, she knew who it was by the vibration of their footsteps. And when she was 6 or 7 years old, her parents hired a tutor to try to teach her. And the tutor brought her a doll and handed her the doll, and she clutched it to her bosom. And then the tutor took her hand, her right hand, and she wrote the word doll on her finger, on her palm. And she did this over and over and over again. And the girl didn't even have the concept of what a word was. But she knew that this thing she was holding in her left hand was represented by what the tutor was doing on her left hand. And so she learned her first word. She would go on to grab some other things in her room, perhaps an apple or an orange or a toy, and bring it to the tutor. And the tutor would write what it was over and over on her hand. By the end of the day, Helen knew 20 words. And she would go on to learn to read Braille, even to learn to speak. And she would graduate from college in time. And she would become a great leader in the women's rights movement. And she would become a great advocate for handicapped people all over the world. Would she have been able to do all this if she hadn't had her, quote, misfortune? We don't know. We can't know. But it's almost certain that that misfortune helped her to live out her dharma and also represented the spiritual lessons that she needed to learn in her life. Was it good karma or was it bad karma? I would argue that it was neither. It was her karma. It was what she needed to grow spiritually. Karma is not simply a means to met out reward and punishment. It does do that, but its higher purpose is to guide us to greater understanding, to guide us to greater spiritual awareness, and ultimately to guide us to joy. Yogananda taught, again, that we should accept everything that comes to us as a gift from God and Guru, to see everything as a means for us to grow spiritually. He once wrote to a disciple, "March on with unperturbed, steady steps, elbowing through a million darknesses. Why, what is this body? What is this passing show? They are gone, but the candles you are lighting and burning in your Father's house will show you your path here and hereafter." We are on this great adventure that leads to greater and greater joy. And if we draw on the grace of our gurus, if we meditate deeply, if we serve selflessly, then the journey itself can be one that is filled with joy, no matter what is happening in our lives, no matter what's happening out there. If we have that joy within, we could be at peace with all circumstances. God bless you.